The sirens shattered the stillness at 3:17 a.m. In Briar Hollow, a postcard-perfect town tucked between rolling hills and dense pine forests, nothing ever happened after midnight. Porch lights stayed on. Doors stayed unlocked. The loudest sound most nights was the distant whistle of a freight train cutting through the valley. But that night, red and blue lights flickered violently against white picket fences. Officer Daniel Mercer gripped the steering wheel as his cruiser sped down Maple Ridge Road. The dispatcher's voice echoed in his mind. Multiple 911 calls. Screaming. Possible home invasion. 14 Willow Lane. Willow Lane was the kind of street where neighbors borrowed sugar and returned it with fresh pie. Where kids biked in circles until sunset. Where the loudest argument anyone remembered was over a dog digging up a flower bed. As Mercer turned the corner, his headlights illuminated a scene that didn't belong in Briar Hollow. The front door of 14 Willow Lane was wide open, hanging off one hinge. The porch light flickered. The wind carried something metallic and thick. Blood. He stepped out slowly, hand on his holster. Backup was 2 minutes out. Briar Hollow PD, he shouted. If anyone's inside, come out with your hands up. Silence. He crossed the threshold, boots crunching over shattered glass. The living room looked like a storm had ripped through it. Furniture overturned. Picture frames smashed. A family portrait lay face down, the glass cracked right across the smiling faces of the Whitakers. Tom Whitaker, 42, local contractor. His wife, Elise, 38, elementary school teacher. Their daughter, Sophie, 10. The kind of family that showed up to every fundraiser. Mercer followed the trail of blood across the hardwood floor. It led toward the kitchen. He rounded the corner, and froze. Tom Whitaker lay on his back near the island counter, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. A deep wound marked his chest. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and sticky. But that wasn't what made Mercer's pulse spike. There were drag marks. The blood didn't end with Tom. It stretched down the hallway, smeared as if someone had been pulled. Elise? Mercer called out, though he already feared the answer. He moved down the hallway, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the distant sirens of backup arriving. The master bedroom was ransacked. Drawers ripped open. Closet doors flung wide. Empty. Then he heard it. A faint, uneven thudding from downstairs. The Whitakers didn't have a basement. At least that's what Mercer thought. He found the door at the end of the hallway, a narrow wooden door, slightly ajar. A door he had never noticed before, despite visiting the home during last summer's neighborhood watch meeting. He pulled it open. Steps descended into darkness. The air was damp. Cold. Wrong. He clicked on his flashlight and started down. At the bottom, the beam landed on something pale against the concrete floor. Elise Whitaker. She was alive. Barely. Her wrists were bound. Her face bruised. Her breathing shallow and rattling. When the light hit her eyes, they fluttered. Daniel, she whispered. He dropped to his knees. Who did this? Elise, who did this? Her lips trembled. It wasn't random. And then she lost consciousness. By sunrise, Briar Hollow was no longer quiet. News vans lined the streets. Neighbors huddled in clusters, wrapped in blankets, whispering theories that made no sense. Home invasion gone wrong. Drug deal. Random violence from someone passing through. Detective Laura Bennett stood in the Whitakers' living room, hands on her hips, surveying the wreckage. She had transferred from Chicago 2 years earlier, hoping for something slower. Something quieter. She hadn't expected this. No signs of forced entry, Officer Mercer told her. Door frames broken now, but it looks like it was opened from the inside first. So they knew the person, Bennett said. Looks that way. Forensics moved carefully around Tom's body. There were no defensive wounds on his arms. No overturned lamps near where he fell. It was as if he had been caught off guard. Trusting. Security system? Bennett asked. Disabled, Mercer replied. Manually. Panel's been tampered with. Bennett stepped outside for air. Across the street stood Mark Dalton, Tom's best friend and business partner. He was pale, shaking, a blanket draped around his shoulders. I was supposed to come over tonight, Mark said when Bennett approached. Poker night. Tom canceled last minute. Said something came up. Did he say what? Bennett asked. Mark shook his head. Just stressed. Work stuff. What kind of work stuff? We've been bidding on a big contract. New development outside town. Worth millions. Money. Money had a way of turning peaceful towns into something else entirely. At the hospital, Elise was rushed into surgery. Severe internal bleeding. Concussion. Broken ribs. Before they wheeled her in, she grabbed Detective Bennett's wrist weakly. "It wasn't random," Elise repeated, eyes wide with fear. He smiled. Who smiled? Bennett pressed. But Elise was already slipping away under anesthesia. By late afternoon, a detail emerged that changed the tone of the entire investigation. Sophie Whitaker wasn't home. Her bed was untouched. No blood. No signs of struggle in her room. She was missing. The town that had woken up to a murder was now facing something worse, a kidnapped child. An Amber Alert was issued within the hour. Cars were stopped on every road leaving Briar Hollow. Volunteers searched the woods with flashlights and dogs. Detective Bennett returned to the Whitakers' house one more time before nightfall. Something nagged at her. She walked through the kitchen again, tracing the blood trail in her mind. Tom had been attacked near the island. Elise dragged to the basement. But there was something off about the scene. Too chaotic. Almost staged. She knelt beside the broken family portrait on the floor. The glass was shattered, but the frame itself was intact. When she lifted it, something slipped out from behind the photo backing. An envelope. Her name was written on it. Detective Laura Bennett. She stared at it, pulse quickening. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Type. "You should have left this town when you had the chance." Bennett felt the room close in around her. She had moved to Briar Hollow to escape a case in Chicago that had gone wrong, a suspect acquitted on a technicality. A man who had stared at her across the courtroom with cold amusement. A man who had whispered as he walked free, "This isn't over." Her phone rang. It was the hospital. "Elise is awake," the nurse said. "But there's something you need to know." "What?" "She keeps saying the same thing. Over and over." Bennett's grip tightened on the letter. "What is she saying?" The nurse hesitated. "She's saying, 'It's Daniel.'" The line went silent. Officer Daniel Mercer was the first one on the scene. And he had been the one to find the hidden basement. But when Bennett looked back down at the typed letter in her hands, she noticed something else. At the bottom of the page, barely visible, was a faint imprint, as if it had been pressed against another sheet when typed. She tilted it toward the light. It wasn't a signature. It was a child's drawing. A small stick figure holding hands with a taller one. And beneath it, in messy handwriting, "Sophie." But when they opened the locked filing cabinet in Daniel Mercer's home that night, what they found inside made the murder at Willow Lane look like just the beginning. Detective Laura Bennett didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. Every time her eyes closed, she saw the Whitaker living room, overturned chairs, Tom's lifeless body, the broken portrait. But more than that, she saw the envelope, the childlike scrawl, Sophie's small hand reaching out through a cryptic message. Whoever had sent it wasn't just taunting her. They were playing a game. Mercer had gone quiet since the hospital call. He sat in the back of his cruiser, fingers drumming on the steering wheel, eyes distant. 4 hours he had told no one about the filing cabinet, not even Bennett. The truth was, the contents had shaken him more than finding the Whitakers themselves. Inside that cabinet were dozens of notebooks, all meticulously organized. Each one chronicled events, but not ordinary events. The writings were a disturbing catalog of Briar Hollow families, routines, schedules, weaknesses. There were entries for every resident on Mercer's beat. Every friend, every neighbor, every stranger who came to town. And in red ink, scattered across pages, were notes that read like threats. "Too trusting, she notices too much, leave no witnesses." Bennett's stomach turned. This isn't just a murder," she said, her voice low, trembling. "This is someone planning, monitoring, the entire town." Mercer's jaw tightened. "I didn't want to believe it. But maybe I've known him longer than I realized." Bennett froze. "Who?" Mercer hesitated, then shook his head. "We need proof before I say anything." But the proof had a way of finding them. Early the next morning, Briar Hollow awoke to an even darker reality. Sophie Whitaker had been spotted on surveillance footage leaving the town limits, bundled into a dark van, her small arms struggling against restraints. Witnesses swore they saw a man, tall, wearing a baseball cap, pulled low, driving. But when police pulled over similar vehicles along the highways, nothing matched. The trail went cold. Bennett went back to the Whitaker house. Elise was conscious now, speaking in short, clipped sentences, but each one carried a weight of terror. He came back last night," Elise whispered. After Daniel found me. I saw him in the window. Watching." Bennett's stomach dropped. If Mercer had been the one who discovered the basement, and if Elise had seen someone watching, then someone else had been orchestrating this from the shadows. Someone patient. Someone close. Forensics worked tirelessly. Fingerprints from the basement were faint, wiped clean, except for one set that kept appearing, Mercer's. Not on the murder scene but on objects Elise had touched. On the railing near the basement. It didn't make sense. Mercer had found her. How could his fingerprints be there in a way that seemed incriminating? Bennett confronted him at the station. Daniel, what aren't you telling me? Mercer's eyes were unreadable. I didn't plant anything. I swear. But I can't explain the rest. Someone's framing me, Laura. Someone who knows exactly how the police think. The words chilled her. Framing a cop? This was beyond any ordinary crime. This was a predator who knew the town, and its protectors, intimately. Meanwhile, the town's residents were on edge. Neighborhood watch volunteers had disappeared from their posts. A local store owner reported hearing muffled cries in the back alley late at night. Panic was spreading. Briar Hollow, once serene and sleepy, had become a labyrinth of fear. Then came the anonymous tip. Bennett received a plain envelope slid under the station door, containing nothing but a photograph. It showed Sophie huddled in a dimly lit room, her face pale, eyes wide. Beside her, scrawled on the wall in what looked like pencil, "She knows too much." Bennett stared at the photo for a long time, then realized something horrifying. The room wasn't in some abandoned warehouse. It was familiar. The wallpaper, the angle of the window, she had seen it before. A flash of memory struck her. Weeks earlier, while canvassing Briar Hollow for leads on a separate case, she had visited an old storage facility on the outskirts of town. One unit had been empty when she saw it, but the pattern of floorboards and the faded wallpaper in that unit matched the room in the photo. She and Mercer went there immediately. The storage unit was locked, dusty and empty at first glance. But Bennett's eyes caught a subtle anomaly, a faint scuff near the back wall. Mercer knelt, pressing lightly. A hidden latch. It opened to a crawlspace. The smell of damp and fear was thick. Inside, remnants of a child's life were scattered across the floor. A torn notebook, a small shoe, crayon drawings. Bennett picked up a sheet, a child's crude rendering of the town with one figure marked in red. A small arrow pointed to Mercer. Bennett's mind raced. Could Mercer be involved? Or was the real predator using him as bait? Before she could process it, the sound of a van pulling into the lot made them freeze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Someone knew they were here. Bennett reached for her gun. Mercer whispered, "Stay calm. Let me handle this." A shadow passed the entrance. The van's engine cut off. And then a voice, calm, familiar, and chilling. "Detective Bennett. I've been waiting for you." The words made her blood run cold. The voice belonged to someone who had lived in Briar Hollow for years. Someone everyone trusted. Someone who no one would suspect. Behind her, Mercer stiffened. They were not just facing a criminal. They were facing a master manipulator, someone who had pulled the strings from the very beginning. The predator stepped fully into the dim light of the storage unit, and Bennett gasped. It was Mark Dalton. Tom Whitaker's best friend. His business partner. The man who had seemed inconsolable over Tom's death and Sophie's disappearance. But his smile was cold, calculated, and utterly devoid of remorse. "You didn't think this would stay quiet forever, did you?" Mark said. His eyes glinted with something Bennett had never seen in a human face before. "Briar Hollow is mine. And anyone who gets in my way, disappears." Before either Mercer or Bennett could react, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind only a faint echo of laughter. And in the corner, a faint whimper reminded them, Sophie was still here. Somewhere in this twisted web. But finding her, alive, would come at a cost no one in Briar Hollow could have anticipated. Bennett knew the investigation had just become personal. And the lines between friend and enemy had been irreversibly blurred. The quiet town was no longer just hiding a secret. It was hiding a monster. And in the dark, the game had only just begun. Detective Laura Bennett and Officer Daniel Mercer spent the next 24 hours in a tense standoff with Briar Hollow's darkest shadow, Mark Dalton. Every call, every tip, every anonymous message seemed to come directly from him. It was as if he was everywhere and nowhere at once, orchestrating fear with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony of terror. They knew time was running out. Sophie Whitaker's survival hung by a thread. And Mark's arrogance was only growing. Bennett reviewed the evidence again and again, desperate for a lead. The photographs from the storage unit, the hidden notebooks in Mercer's home, and Elise Whitaker's fractured testimony painted a chilling picture. Mark had been observing the town for years. Every family, every routine, every secret, meticulously catalogued. And Sophie, the child who had inadvertently witnessed his cruelty, had become a pawn in his game. Mercer paced the office. "Laura, I need to tell you something," he said, voice low. "The fingerprints in my house. I didn't plant them, but I saw them before. I saw Mark copying my work habits, tracing my movements, figuring out how I think. He's more than just dangerous, he's smart. Smarter than anyone I've ever met." Bennett felt a cold chill. "We're not just dealing with a murderer," she said. "We're dealing with a predator who knows our minds." Their breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A Briar Hollow resident, an elderly woman named Agnes Powell, had been quietly watching the investigation from her window. She called the station in a shaky voice, insisting she had seen Mark making unusual trips to an abandoned mill on the outskirts of town. The mill had been empty for decades. A relic of the town's fading industry, it was perfect for someone who wanted to hide in plain sight. Bennett and Mercer approached the mill at dusk. The sky was painted in bruised purples and fiery reds, the kind of sunset that made shadows seem alive. They moved quietly, checking every corner. Broken windows, rusted machinery, and the smell of mold greeted them. And then they heard it, the faintest sound of a child crying. "Sophie." They followed the sound to a back room, barricaded with old wooden planks. The door was locked from the inside. Mercer tried the handle. Nothing. Bennett's heart pounded. "Daniel," she whispered, "get the crowbar." With a swift motion, Mercer forced the door open. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. And there she was, Sophie, huddled in the corner, clutching a small stuffed rabbit, eyes wide with fear. Her thin frame shook. "Sophie!" Bennett exclaimed, rushing forward. The girl flinched but allowed Bennett to gather her in a protective embrace. Before they could leave, a voice called from the shadows. "Ah, you found her." Mark Dalton stepped forward, a smirk on his face. His eyes gleamed in the flickering light, calculating and cold. "I was wondering how long it would take you to follow the breadcrumbs." Bennett drew her gun. "It's over, Mark. Briar Hollow knows who you really are." Mark laughed, the sound echoing through the empty mill. "You think you've won? You don't even know the full story." Mercer edged forward, hand on his weapon. "She's just a child, Mark. Let her go." Mark tilted his head as if considering. "You don't understand. This town, it's rotten. Everyone lies. Everyone hides secrets. I just exposed them. And now, everyone who got in my way, paid the price." Bennett's mind raced. He had killed Tom. He had kidnapped Sophie. And somehow he had manipulated Mercer, Elise, and the entire town. Then, in a sudden move, Mark lunged for a hidden panel in the wall. Bennett fired a warning shot. The bullet shattered a window pane, causing Mark to stumble. Mercer tackled him, pinning him against the wall. The struggle was fierce, but Mercer's training won. Mark was cuffed, breathing heavily, eyes wild with fury. "You'll never understand," he spat. "I didn't lose. This is just the beginning." Bennett shook her head. "No, Mark. This ends tonight." Police backup arrived minutes later. Sophie was taken to safety, and Mark Dalton was led away in cuffs, finally silenced, at least for now. But the revelations didn't end there. Back at the station, they examined the notebooks and photographs more closely. Hidden in the margins of several pages were references not just to the Whitakers, but to almost every prominent family in Briar Hollow. Every secret, every misstep, meticulously recorded. Mark had been planning something far larger than anyone realized. A terror campaign hidden in plain sight spanning years. Ann Mercer's house, the storage unit, even the school Sophie attended, all had been surveilled. Elise Whitaker's recovery was slow but steady. She returned home with Sophie, grateful yet haunted. And as Bennett looked out over Briar Hollow from her office window, she realized the town would never be the same. There was relief, yes. Mark Dalton was caught. Sophie was safe. But the quiet streets, the perfect lawns, the friendly neighbors, all had been exposed as fragile veneers. And Bennett knew that the scars of what happened would linger long after the headlines faded. 3 months later, Briar Hollow tried to return to normal. Children played in yards again. Neighbors waved to each other. But at night, the wind still carried whispers. And in the dark, the memory of Mark Dalton's gaze haunted those who remembered, a chilling reminder that monsters often wear the mask of familiarity. Detective Bennett never forgot the warning in the letter. "You should have left this town when you had the chance." And though Mark was behind bars, the notebook suggested he might not have been acting alone. Someone else in Briar Hollow had known. Someone had helped him. The town had survived, but the truth was clear. The real terror wasn't over. It was just waiting, quiet, patient, and watching. Briar Hollow would never be quiet again.